We're joined now by Aengus Kennedy from Nature Northwest. And Aengus, good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
2 o'clock.
John.
Normally we do this at 12:30, but this is a slightly different time.
Well, busy times, and not just us. Nature's busy too. Everything's busy out the window at the moment.
I'll tell you where it's not busy, on Spring Watch, and I've become addicted to Spring Watch this year, and I've often seen it and just noticed it in passing, but this year, I don't know why, but just once it's on, you kind of get sucked into it, and it's at a lovely leisurely pace, and they go up to Scotland, and then they go to different parts of the UK, and they're out on beaches, and they're in, uplands and lowlands and all down lakes and stuff. And it's just everything that's around us. It's all about, so it's such a simple premise for a TV program. It's what's all around us.
But they do it very well. Their information is spot on. They have a great way of telling a story. And then, of course, the camera work compared to what it was a few years ago is sensational. I often say it on walks and talks and when I'm out with school groups myself, that our nature is as amazing as anywhere. It's as fascinating as anywhere, but it's all miniature. So we don't have big elephants and tigers and hippopotamuses, but we do have incredible stuff. Only yesterday, with a school group, we were looking at 2 different types of plant in a bog that eat insects. There's so little nutrition in the soil in bogs, in peat, of course, that 2 different plants that live there, or at least 2 different groups of plants that live there, of which there's a few species of each, have adapted to be able to supplement their diet by catching midges, which is good for us, and it's good for everything. But they're literally able to lure in that little insect, capture it, kill it, and then get the nutrition from it. And we don't think of plants as doing that kind of thing, It's fascinating, but they're tiny.
That's the sort of thing the kids would love. Oh, plants, wow. And they're killer plants, are they? So I can just imagine.
Kids love it, and then when you mention the midges, everybody loves it.
Yes, this is true. This is true. Anyhow, one of the great things about Spring Watch is that it does a real focus every evening on birds, and they have nest cameras that show them, the nest, the chicks growing up. The whole idea is to show them starting getting bigger and leaving the nest, and that's happening now at this time in nests all around us, just in case you come across a nest or you disturb a nest. So I suppose it's important that we should know sort of what's going on, and at this time of the year there's a lot going on because the chicks are being nudged out of the nest.
They are, yeah. And I was going to play a sound. It's a sound that's really common in all our gardens now. If you've got some shrubbery, if you've got some lower shrubs and some trees anywhere nearby, there's a very good chance, even if they haven't been nesting in your own garden, that they're passing through your garden right now. So I'll play this sound, and I don't know how well this will turn out, but it's the sound of the baby birds, little blue tits in this case, and their begging calls. They're calling out to mum or dad for more food.
Quite faint, but recognisable nonetheless.
It's very faint, and it's just that persistent little cheeping. And next time you're sitting down in our lovely parks in Letterkenny, or if you're out for a gentle walk around the hedgerows, or you're sitting down in your own garden, and you hear that cheeping, stop and look up, and you'll see them moving, bouncing from branch to branch. And the tiny little coal tits and great tits and those kind of birds that have come out of the little nest boxes and out of the little cavities where they've been nesting, you'll see the baby birds. They won't be as distinctive colour-wise, so they're not rivaling the other males and whatnot. So they're much kind of duller colours, and they'll be waving their little wings, and that's how you'll know them straight away. You'll see them on the branches doing that constant call as mum and dad are picking off the thousands of bugs from underneath the leaves and the rest.
It's a tough time for them because, one day they're in the nest, maybe the next day they're out on a branch, and the day after that they have to take flight because eventually that's where they have to go, up in the air for the first time.
Yeah, well, you think of our teenagers, and we still feed them every day.
Yeah.
And we joke with our own children. We said, we fed you yesterday, you need feeding again today. And you think of, or some of the conversation around the elections that was going on, and the excellent coverage that was going on locally there for the last few days by yourselves. And so much of the talking about housing, and in some cases adult children haven't left the house. Well, imagine if we were all birds, those little garden birds, and the likes of the little robins or the blue tits. They will feed their babies for about 2 weeks after they leave the nest. So they spend about 3 weeks once they hatch in the nest, growing.
And 2 more weeks.
Then they're old enough to
fed.
fly, 2 weeks being fed, and then mum and dad head off.
So after they learn to fly, they still come back to the nest for a couple of weeks.
Well, sorry, not to the nest, but they still stay with mum and dad. Okay. Yeah, they stay with mum and dad. So the nest is pretty much done at that stage, but they'll stay in together as a little flock. And so this time of year is magic. And you'll see, even driving up here today a little while ago, a few minutes ago, I can see there was a bunch of, I think it was sparrows and another bunch of chaffinches along the road, and they were all feeding, picking up little seeds that had fallen off some grass on the road, and they'll burst out in front of you. And if you see these tiny little flocks, typically on the back roads, on the quiet roads, on the country lanes, that's what it is. It's a little family of baby birds.
It's probably a dangerous time, is it, for chicks when they've left the nest and they're still not used to the big bad world, because they can become prey.
Yeah, absolutely, very easily. Yeah, so keep your cat indoors if you can, and stick a bell on it if you can't. The cats get a huge amount of these birds because that's it. They're a bit slower. They're not so sharp. Plus, they just can't fly as well. Their full flight feathers are still developing. Their strength is still developing. So about half of the baby birds from the likes of, say, a blue tit's nest are killed off within the first couple of weeks.
Our cat is no different to others and gets a lot of birds and seems to land back with them as a trophy. When one animal gets another animal and it's for food, then you understand it. But she seems to get them just to play with them. And then it's too late by the time you rescue them.
Yeah, and it's that funny thing of we love our cats, and of course, in some cases they play a very important role for pest control, getting rid of mice and rats and things like that. However, the cats they're all domesticated to some extent, even if it's outside and you never really look after too much because
she doesn't have to worry about her food. So
exactly, yeah. So but it still needs to worry about its instincts. We all can't help our instinctive drives. And cats, like all the other animals out there, they're answering those instinctive calls. So they're out hunting at dawn, they're out hunting in the evening time, hunting at night, even if they don't need the food.
And birds of prey, I suppose, as well.
Birds of prey, so sparrowhawks, for instance, are the most common bird of prey in Ireland, and they're the ones that are after those small little birds. And it seems cruel and it seems sad to us if something like a bird of prey takes one of our baby blue tits or great tits, but you've got to remember the ones that survive. The ones that survive this first couple of weeks, that's the most difficult bit. And then the next most difficult bit is surviving the winter that's ahead. And if they get through that winter, well, then they're the fittest, they're the strongest, they're the smartest that are able to breed again next year.
That's nature.
That's nature, yeah.
If we do come across a nest, or if we do come across a chick that's somehow fallen out of the nest or separated from the nest, what should we do?
In general, leave it alone. So if it's in your garden, make sure your pets are away from it and can't get it. If you think it's terribly exposed, well, you could try and gently encourage it underneath a little hedge. But if you see a baby bird on the ground chirping away or getting very still when you get close to it, mum or dad are most likely watching you. And all small birds, or most small birds at least, have the ability to be able to burst out of the nest 2, 3 or 4 days before they're able to fly. So normally they stay for about 3 weeks in the nest. But if something like your cat disturbed that nest, and remember, a lot of nests are quite low down. A lot of them are kind of waist height or even lower. Robins will nest right down at ankle height. Willow warblers, one of our most common migratory birds that comes from Africa, they also nest on the ground in the ditches, in little holes there. And if something disturbs them, they'll burst out of that nest and distribute around the place. And then mum or dad will call them when it's safe and try and call them back together into the safety of the hedge. It's also another reason why it's very important to leave our hedges alone, very important to leave our grass verges alone, because the grass verges are providing shelter for those birds, but also food, crucially food. And as we've seen, study after study is starting to really show now that our insect numbers are going down this year, and so much relies on that.
Something else we have to protect is the sand dunes. And again, another place where we find nests. But I mean, sand dunes protect us, so it's only right that we should protect them. And it's never more timely than now with climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Sand dunes are amazing as coastal defence. So we've got our rocky shores and our sand dunes, you think typically of any kind of coast. And an awful lot of our coasts are sand, and they're held together by the types of plants that live on them. And they're special types of plants called haliophytes. And haliophytes is the fancy word for a plant that can drink salty water, basically. So if you put your potato or your normal grass in the field or your rose bush into salt water, it wouldn't be able to survive. It would suck up some of that water and the salt would block it up and it would kill it. Whereas these plants, they've the ability to take up salty water and to push out the salt. And of course, the nature of sand dunes is obviously they're very sandy, so they drain very quickly. So any plant that has that ability to suck up salty water tends to have a really comprehensive root system. And those roots, like fine little threads spreading out in every kind of direction, they act as a net and they bind together the sand. And they hold that sand dune together, which then protects the football pitch or the caravan park or the homes or our roads or whatever is behind those sand dunes, as long as they're not trampled on too much.
Yeah, something as simple as, because, when we were small, I remember back to childhood, running through the sand dunes was a simple pleasure when we were along at the beach, but it's discouraged now.
Yeah, well, and you see kids still getting great pleasure out of lashing down the sand dunes and running down the sand dunes. And who is going to stop a bunch of kids having a bit of fun? Yeah. But what we're getting more and more aware of now is marking off areas that we need to protect, marking off some of the more fragile areas. And whatever about the occasional family running up and down a sand dune, one of the big damages that's done is quad bikes, and that's quite a new thing. Quad bikes and scrambler bikes. And in fact, there's been 2 cases very recently. In West Donegal, one in Gweedore, around the Maharagalan area, where there was some folk came from far away, let's just say, and they were driving their scrambler bikes, and they possibly thought they were having a great time, and they saw this, what to them looked like a big open, empty wasteland, I suppose. But they were driving them up and down the dunes, and I would imagine that's great crack. However, the damage they do, it only takes one bike to go up a dune once, and that trail will be there for months, if not years. And then, of course, a bunch of them do it, and they rip it apart. So the guards were called on them. They got into bother. The guards got there in time, fair play. But there was another gang that were out recently in the amazing Sheshkin Moor Nature Reserve. And Sheshkin Moor Nature Reserve is one of our finest sand dunes. It's a specific type of sand dune, actually, that's there. And it holds a huge amount of flowers, because the farmers that are there, they work to a very specific farm plan, and they farm in a way that's very good for nature, in a very traditional way, where cattle go on in the winter and they come off at other times of year. And that allows a lot of huge amount of flowers, and very unusual flowers, a lot of ground nesting birds. It's an amazing place to go. And it's managed by the national parks and these farmers, and these great farmers that are looking after the place so well. However, there was a bunch of scrambler bikes out there running up and down the dunes, and they'll destroy them. They'll ruin the place in no time if they're allowed to do it.
See, for people on scramblers, as you say, it's a big open area, and it's it's very inviting, and it's usually easily accessible. So you can understand why they gravitate towards sand dunes.
You can, of course. And like any of these things, you can't just put in a prohibition. So for certain areas, there's the right places and the wrong places to do anything. So much like we don't want folk doing donuts on junctions on our public roads. However, there's more and more places that are opening up now to allow people do what they want to do in their cars and have their fun, as long as it's controlled to some extent. And perhaps that's something we need to look at for quad bikes and scramblers as well, because it certainly seems to be a bigger and bigger issue. And not just on sand dunes, taking those kind of machines onto bogs as well. If it's happening on a kind of leisure based, if it's not just somebody trying to round up their sheep, that's a different thing. But if people are just running across these things for fun, they're very fragile habitats and they get destroyed.
In some countries, they're realising that protecting sand dunes is the way to go in order to protect coastlines. So they're investing time and effort into that, rather than a built structure which would protect homes that are on the other side of sand dunes. So now they're protecting the sand dunes. In the hope that will do the job, that nature will take care of things.
Completely, and they call those kind of ideas nature-based solutions. And environmentalists, scientists have been shouting about nature-based solutions forever. However, that doesn't always suit industry, and quite often people feel the need to dig holes, feel the need to pour concrete, feel the need to build things, and think that they can somehow master nature like that. And of course, there's always the right place to have your drains or your concrete barriers or your stone walls built. But more often than not, natural-based solutions, such as making sure the sand dunes are healthy, and they will erode to a certain extent. Sand dune systems are fluid; they move just very slowly. But that sand is quite often not being moved terribly far away. It might be moved up the beach, and a few years later it'll be pushed back down the beach by the natural systems, as long as everything is in place, as long as we have all the right plants in place. and we're not changing that ourselves.
So they are fragile, despite the fact that they have plants holding them all together. They are still fragile and susceptible to whether that's us running over them or as you say, scramblers or quads. They can be fragile, so they do need to be protected.
Completely, yeah, very much so. So all the different activities that we do, be it learning to drive, be it out with our quad bikes, or even the act of going camping, the wild camping as people now call it. And when there was only a few people doing those things in years gone by, the impact was very low. Unfortunately, those things have become more and more popular, which puts an onus on Donegal County Council and Bord Fáilte and the rest of them to start looking and see how can we manage this, because we want people to visit Donegal, but we want what they come to visit to be in good shape.
Yeah.
And we don't want them to arrive here and say, oh, they've destroyed the very habitat that we've come to see. They've destroyed the lovely place that we've come to see. So that's where we need to have more facilities for folk when they come to visit. And that way it can be managed and we can all enjoy our sand dunes or whatever other habitat it is.
There's actually an awareness campaign later this month and a designated day, World Sand Dune Day, which is coming up on the 25th. So we'll be hearing more about sand dunes as the month goes on. Now, some questions coming in from listeners. Are there many squirrels here in Donegal, and where would be a good place to see them? Well, when it comes to squirrels, there's the whole divide. Red, which is native, is that right? And then grey, which is the invasive.
Red, and yeah, because and this question actually had sent on to me a little while ago. You said it would come in, so I put up on my Facebook page a screen grab of a map of all of the grey squirrel sightings so far, and all of the red squirrel sightings so far for Donegal. And you can see those two maps side by side and you'll see the distribution. The red squirrels, it's more scattered. There's not as many of them, but there is a kind of broader distribution, if that makes sense. Whereas the grey squirrels, they have spread kind of as far as the Shannon, all the way from the east coast of Ireland, as far as the Shannon, and they're in kind of, I suppose, the right-hand side of Donegal, if you're looking at a Donegal map. Grey squirrels, they tend to push out the red squirrels. Grey squirrels are not a native creature. They were introduced a little over 100 years ago, and they're from America, and they carry a disease that the red squirrel can't deal with. They can eat nuts that aren't ripe, which the red squirrel can't get, and so on. So unfortunately, around my area in Ramelton and Rathmullen, it's grey squirrels that we have. Whereas if you go to, say, the likes of Garton, if you go to the lovely woods down in Muff, around that area, or some areas around, say, Loch Esk, and some of those forests down that way, Ardnamona Woods, you have a very good chance of seeing the red squirrels, the native red squirrel.
The best place to see them, obviously, is in densely wooded areas.
Densely wooded areas, yeah. And we're very lucky in Donegal compared to some of the other western counties. A lot of our areas are tree lined, and so if you think of even around here, Letterkenny, to get from here to Ramelton or Rathmullen or Kilmacrennan or Milford, all of those areas, if you're a squirrel, you don't really want to touch the ground too much. And you could make it most of the way by connecting up to all the different types of woodland that we have. So again, it shows the importance of connectivity, of planting a few trees, and even if you only have a small bit of land, of trying to leave some room for nature on it, so nature can hop onto your land and then move on to the next bit.
When it comes to preserving the numbers of red squirrels, is the pine marten playing a part?
It is, and that's an excellent example. It's an example of how if we fix the right thing. So pine martens are another native creature on crown cat, the tree cat, they're called in Irish. So they look quite like a cat, even down to the little pointy ears. They're brown with a white patch underneath on their neck, under their chin.
Are pine martens harmful to humans?
No, they're not like anything. If it was cornered, it'll try and defend itself. But no, in general, no. They've come under pressure with humans in the past because they'll take poultry sometimes. Like the mink, yeah. And the mink now is all black, and the mink as an invasive species prefers water courses and coastlines and whatnot. But the pine marten was terribly persecuted up until recent times. Now they're starting to come back because we've got wise. We've realised we shouldn't be hunting them for their fur. We shouldn't be shooting them just because of their presence. We should be protecting our own animals instead of trying to persecute them. And wherever the pine marten has come back, and pine martens are in Donegal, they can hunt and kill the grey squirrel, which is bigger and heavier and can't go out onto the little branches and spends more time in the ground. But they're not as successful as hunting the red squirrel, which makes sense because those two animals have lived side by side for thousands and thousands of years. So the red squirrel escapes, the grey squirrel gets hunted, and then the red squirrel numbers tend to go back up again. So it's such a great example. sand dunes, there's a lot of examples for that as well. If you can fix the one type of plant and the one type of area in a sand dune that might be in damage, the rest of it can tend to flourish. If you could fix the right type of grazing regime, be it on the sand dunes or the bog, the rest tends to flourish. And the same for the pine marten. If you can bring a pine marten into a reasonably healthy native woods, well, then the red squirrel in time will hopefully flourish.
Okay, and finally, a question about silage bales. Birds are tearing holes now in my silage bales. How do I get rid of them? Keep them away. How do I keep them away, I suppose?
Yeah, it's difficult, and they've actually done a lot of study with this. So in 2002, Teagasc did a great study, and they painted all sorts of different designs on them, and they tried different coloured bales, and they tried lots of different things. And of course, the most effective way is, if you can't store them covered in somewhere, is to put some kind of physical barrier on top, some kind of netting or whatnot on top of it. Or better again than netting, because birds can get caught in the netting, is plastic sheeting, kind of heavy builder's material that's maybe raised a bit above the bales. But if that's too much work to do, try and store them somewhere where the crows aren't going to be coming as frequently. So if we have just topped our field to get the silage off it, or if we've spread slurry, well, then the worms and the grubs and whatnot don't like the slurry. They tend to come to the surface. So either of those activities will attract a lot of gulls, attract a lot of rooks. And so try and keep them away from there. But from the painting bit on it, they found the best design to paint on it. In fact, about the only effective design is if you paint a giant eye. And if you think...
So from a distance, they feel like they're being looked at.
They think they're being watched. And if you think of, say, the peacock butterfly with its 4 big eyes on it. So the peacock butterfly opens up its wings and you see these 4 big eyes and you think there's a huge, crazy creature looking at you. And the crow is effectively thinking the same thing. And that study that Teagasc did, they found that numbers were... the damage was reduced to less than 20% of what it had been without the eyes, or with just maybe crosses or something else painted on them. So get out there, get painting eyes.
And clever solution.
Very clever, and a bit of fun too, and you could knock a bit of fun out of that with your kids or the neighbours' kids or whatever.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aengus.
If I could mention, if it was possible, just there's 2 different events coming up that I think would be well worth doing. Glebe Gardens have a gorgeous event on the end of this month, the weekend, the 29th and 30th. In Glebe Gardens and Gallery, and they've got the amazing Lorcan Scott, who's a brilliant guy to listen to, Brendan Little, and it's all about gardens. It's all about biodiversity in gardens. And then their own Ryan Macaulay, and he has a fantastic meadow system going on there, wildflower meadow system. It's very beautiful, so well worth doing that. And then Wild In a Shown are putting on an event next Saturday, which I'll be at myself in Swan Park. So that's that's the Saturday the 22nd. Saturday the 22nd, 10 o'clock till 3 in Swan Park. Yeah, and there's going to be moth traps, there's going to be butterfly identification, there's going to be all sorts of different nature activities there. It should be a lovely thing.
Right. Yeah. And will you have more info up on the Nature Northwest?
Yes, we'll be sharing that on the social media and the rest.
Thanks, Aengus.
Brilliant.
Get with